Hi, I'm Karen Leday with IFREC Real Estate Schools. I'm going to be showing you the topic of prorating figures that will be used on a closing statement. The prorations will involve property taxes, interest on an assumed loan, and rent. This video is on property taxes. Now, any expense paid in arrears, meaning at an end of a time period, is going to be a debit from the seller and a credit to the buyer. Why is that? In the case of property taxes, that seller owned the property for part of the year until he sold the property. The taxes aren't paid until the end of that year. So when the new owner gets the tax bill in November, he's going to get the entire tax bill for the year. That wouldn't be fair for the seller not to pay their share of the taxes. So prorations make the expenses fair in the case of property taxes. Now, when I do a calculation for prorating property taxes, the first thing I do is count the number of days the seller will have owned the property. You start on January 1, and you count all the days in each month up until the closing date. Now, the problem's going to tell you who owns that closing date. If the seller owns the closing date, you count that date in the number of days. If the buyer owns that closing date, then the seller is responsible for the taxes up through the day before closing. So let's look at an example. A closing date is on April 15th. The annual property taxes are $2,283.44. The day of closing is charged to the buyer. Using the 365-day method, how much does who owe whom at closing for the taxes? So this is a very common question. You need to calculate the proration and also give the answer as to who gets the debit, who gets the credit. So the seller will have owned the property for part of the year. The seller will owe the buyer that amount of money. Seller gets the debit, buyer gets the credit. The first thing, again, you do in a calculation is count the number of seller days. January, February, March, and 14 days in April, because the day of closing belongs to the buyer. The total number of days in this example is 104. Keep that on the side, you'll need it later. In prorations, we're working to get a daily rate of what we're prorating. So we take the annual property taxes of $2,283.44 divided by 365 days in a year, and the daily tax is $6.256. Don't round at that point. Leave that number in your calculator, because the next step is multiplying that number times the number of days that you calculated in step 1. The answer of $650.62 is the prorated amount. That's going to be debit to the seller, credit to the buyer. Now, another thing to remember in prorating tax questions. When you read the question, there will be 4 answers staring you in the face. Look at the question, read it twice, look at every answer before you pick one, but look at the answers before you even pick up your calculator. In this case, the closing was in April. It's in the first half of the year. Total taxes for the year were over $2,000. The answer can't be greater than $1,000 because the seller is only responsible for January 1st through the closing date, so to April 14th. So if there are any answers over $1,000, eliminate those. If there are any answers that say credit seller, debit buyer, eliminate those. And sometimes you don't even need a calculator for these math problems. That's how you prorate taxes.